Good evening. Welcome to the special meeting of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education, July 6th, 2015. Mrs. Bonifield, will you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes, here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mrs. Laura?
Here.
Mrs. McDonald?
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield is here. President Burton?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. If you are watching from home tonight, you can follow along with our agenda by going to www.livoniapublicschools.org. Hover over the School Board tab and drop down to Agendas, and you can follow along for the evening. The purpose of our meeting this evening is to interview the different companies that have put a request for proposal in for our superintendent search. The next item on our agenda right now is item 2, audience communications. We do not have anyone present in our audience this evening other than those who are participating in the meeting tonight, so we'll be going on to item 3, interviews for superintendent search consultant. And Mr. Winnery, would you like to address the board on this issue?
Certainly. Good evening. As you all know, Dr. Randy Liepa is leaving Livonia Public Schools to take a position with Wayne Risa, and that will be effective August 3rd. The Board of Education, in a meeting held June 15th, directed the Director of Human Resources, that would be me, to contact 7 executive search firms to determine their interest in submitting a proposal to conduct a search for a new superintendent. Interview dates for the search firms were tentatively scheduled for the evenings of July 6th and July 8th, with another meeting to be held on July 9th, at which we would hope to make a selection for a consultant. After contacting the firms, the Human Resources Director invited 6 firms to submit proposals. Each firm was requested to submit a proposal that included information relevant to the search, including a cover letter with background information regarding their firm, names, background, and qualifications of the principals of the firm, names, background, and qualifications of the personnel involved in carrying out the services required for the search, and their record of conducting similar searches, names, background, and qualifications of the person who will be assigned as the head person to conduct the search and the primary contact to the district, a description of demonstrated success in conducting superintendent searches and in carrying out the search services. Of particular interest is information pertaining to searches for school districts of similar size and scope as Livonia Public Schools. We've asked for a description of services provided. We've asked for documentation indicating the average longevity of candidates placed in the superintendent positions by that firm. We've asked for school district references. We've asked for a proposed plan to demonstrate how the search will be conducted, the personnel who will perform the required services, and a description of process and general timelines to complete the search and the related services. We've also asked for a detailed fee structure and a description of anticipated expenses. We've gotten 6 proposals from the 6 firms. Tonight we've scheduled 3 of those firms to present to the board and to respond to your questions. 3 firms presenting tonight are the Michigan Association of School Boards, BWP and Associates, and School Exec Connect. And unless you have additional comments, Mrs. Burton, I would introduce our first presenter tonight.
The only thing I'd like to emphasize is something that you already stated, Mr. Winnery, which is we will be interviewing the firms tonight. We will be interviewing 3 other firms Wednesday night, and the deliberation among board members and the decision will be occurring on Thursday night. So if you're looking for discussion amongst the board between the firms, that will be taking place Thursday evening. We will be definitely having as many folks as want to have question and answers with each of the firms do so this evening. We also have scheduled the 3 firms at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and 8 o'clock. So we will be taking a brief break in between those. At least it's anticipated that we will. So if you see us off the air for a few moments, that's what's going on. We'll be returning on the hour with different firms. So, you'd like to go ahead?
Very good. Our first firm tonight is the Michigan Association of School Boards. And our guest tonight is Donna Oser, who is the Executive Director of MASB. So welcome tonight.
Thank you.
We'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you for the invitation. Appreciate the opportunity to come and meet with all of you tonight. The correction, so I'm not the Executive Director of the Michigan Association of School Boards. I am the Director of Executive Search and Leadership Services. Kathy Hayes is in the process of retiring, and Don Watruba, I think, is taking the helm in the next couple of weeks. I'm sure you've read about that in our publication. So just to be clear, I do have to see Don next week, and, you know, very good. Well, I like to approach these conversations as open and as transparent as possible. Now, obviously, I have provided some handouts to you, and we can certainly talk through some of that. As your membership association, you know, representing school boards, we like to use this as a learning opportunity for all of you and make sure that regardless of which firm that you end up going with, that you're armed with good information so that you know what to expect. So we can kind of use the presentation as a general framework for our conversation, but I would encourage you to ask any and all questions that you have during the presentation and then also afterwards. We'll start with a little bit of background, if that's okay. Before I start, is there anything in particular that you want to make sure that we cover specifically because this is MASB? You know, sometimes boards want to ask kind of their school board association a specific question or two about search. I want to make sure I get those answered for sure for you.
Are there questions, board members specifically at this point?
Not at this point.
not
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
I'm sure we'll, knowing
will.
our board, I'm sure we'll have several as we go along. And is it all right with you if we jump in with questions as we're going through the process? Or would you
Absolutely.
prefer them at the end?
No, at any point during the
All right.
presentation, please jump in so we'll
Okay.
get them answered then. All right, terrific.
Alrighty. So let me know, board, if you have any questions, and we'll make sure we get everyone addressed.
Now, I understand, after my conversation with Mr. Winooey, that I am the first, so I'm sure by the end of all of these, you'll be experts, right? So you may have more questions now than you will later on. I'm going to, kind of be brief in setting the framework for MASB's work in executive search. I know that you are all familiar with MASB. You know, we have done many, many, many searches, probably more than any other firm in Michigan over the years. I think what's important for you to note is that I came on board MASB 2 years ago specifically to overhaul the program. And that was because MASB really wanted to make sure that we were doing an excellent job in serving boards of education. And I had done kind of a thorough investigation of it as a consultant, ironically, and found that there was opportunity for improvement. So my only intention in this conversation is to be, as I said, transparent and also very candid with you about some things that I've learned along the way that hopefully will allow you to make a better decision. Not even so much about the firm that you're going to end up choosing, but more about making a good decision in your next leader. I know that you've had a terrific superintendent. Obviously, you know, we did the search for Wayne Risa, so that's always awkward when you're going in to talk with the board, and sometimes the board feels a little bit like, hey, you know, you took our superintendent. But I think all of you were very aware of the fact that he was certainly ready, you know, to make that leap. And if anything, the scope of the good that he can do has just gotten larger, I think. So I'm sure you understand that. Well, that said, you know, there's usually a fair amount of conversation about superintendent tenure. Now, you have had an excellent run here in Livonia with regards to that. But know that across the state and nationally, that's not necessarily the case. I'm going to zoom forward a little bit and have you look at this slide that has kind of an outline of the United States on it. So one of the things that came as a terrific surprise, Mr. Centers, I actually passed out an additional handout.
Oh.
And so you'll find it, there you go.
Thank you.
Yep, everybody else? Okay, perfect. One of the things that surprised me is there was no one in Michigan accurately tracking or vigorously tracking superintendent tenure. So most of the data that we find about superintendent tenure actually comes from the national data that's collected in a 10-year study by the American Association of School Administrators. So from their last study, which was done in 2006, we know that the vacancies turn over, you know, about 1 in 4, right, 20-25% annually. Now, there are some things that you need to know about that so that as you're getting ready to recruit your next superintendent, you have that as part of your strategy. So know that the high cost of relocation is something that candidates are going to be looking at, right? So that's something that you might want to think about when you're putting your strategy together. Obviously, there are more dual income households now than there were previously. So what that means is that you're not just necessarily trying to entice your next superintendent, but his or her spouse as well, because they're going to need to find employment as well if they don't come from the immediate area. The superintendency as a whole, believe it or not, has become a less desirable position than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And the reason for that is school board leaders, you already know this, but it's really about increasing expectations, decreasing resources, and and kind of the struggle that goes on now daily in districts. It's just a more difficult job that's often done under much more scrutiny than there used to be. So it's not necessarily as appealing as it used to be. There's also just an increase in job uncertainty. Now that's true nationally. It's particularly true in Michigan. In the last board election in November, 1,000 school board seats in Michigan were up for election. 700 of those were filled by people who'd never been school board members before. So you can imagine if you were a superintendent in a district that had 2, 3, 4, or 5 seats, and it did happen, that turned over in that election, you could have gone into that election very comfortable in your position and feeling like you had a good relationship with your board, and you could have come out of it no longer knowing your board and having a very uncertain set of circumstances. So Michigan has probably maybe a more specific issue with uncertainty in this particular year than we have had previously because of the reform to elections. Let me talk a little bit about some other Michigan factors, and then let's just check in to see if you have any questions on just kind of the talent pool in general. So the next slide really is focusing on some additional pieces of information that we want you to have in mind about Michigan. So one of the things that has further affected our talent pool is those early outs of 4 and 5 years ago. So while that was important as far as bringing new blood into education, anybody who kind of works in workforce development knows that it takes time to develop a talent pipeline. So think of it kind of as a vacuum, right? So we pulled out 17 or 18,000 folks who retired, and that pulled, teachers into administrator roles, building level principals into central office, and on up in the ranks. So it takes a little time for the system to catch up. So know that that's going to affect your pool. And also, because we live with it every day, we don't always think of kind of our laws in the context of the entire country. We have some of the most strictest regulation with regards to transparency. So those are referred to on this as the Sunshine Law, but we know it as our Open Meetings Act. Now, let me just talk for a minute about why that makes a difference in your candidate pool. So there are states, I'll use Pennsylvania as an example, where as a candidate, I could apply, I could go through the entire search process, and literally my name would not be known to the public until the board chose me. And so what that means as a candidate is that my current employer may or may not need to know about this, right? And it also could mean that you may or may not have access to the same amount of information that you would have otherwise, now kind of in the age of social media. So when candidates are taking a look at to apply or not to apply, these are things that they're thinking about. In Michigan, regardless of who does the search, for the most part, it's going to have to be a very open and transparent one. Now, some of the firms, because part of my responsibility in representing you all is making sure that I understand how different firms do search. And so some of them will interpret the Open Meetings Act a little differently, and they'll also interpret closed session a little differently. So you may find some differences when you're interviewing folks where when they'll say you can go into closed session. MASB's practice is not to go into closed session unless we're sharing test results with you. So if a board chooses to do some pre-screening assessments, which is pretty common in hiring, then we would go into closed session to share the results of those pre-screening assessments. But beyond that, the entire search is going to take place in the light of day and open to public scrutiny. We do that because obviously we think that it is helpful to boards in helping them build consensus and support for the candidate that they're ultimately going to hire. But you will hear some differences, and all I would say to you about that is, just be informed, right? I mean, ask questions and know that regardless of who's representing you as a search firm, MASB has 3 attorneys on staff, and you can call them anytime, and they'll be happy to answer your questions. And not in a stressful way, but in a helpful way. You imagine that we get hundreds of calls in the course of a week, and so I like to say we've heard every scenario, but I'm always taking new ones back, and they're like, really, Donna? Where do these come from? But for the most part. Okay, so before I move on, why do we share that with you about the candidate pool? Is we want you to know that, right? When you're developing your strategy, you're going to need to work as a board to figure out, what your compensation strategy is going to be. You're going to need to figure out if there are some additional pieces in there like relocation expenses, things like that. One of the things that I see boards struggle with the most, and I empathize, I really get it, is this notion of we want to do a huge search. You know, we jokingly call it an intergalactic search, right? So as broad and as far and as wide of a reach as we possibly can. And part of that is because you feel committed to serve your community, right? So you want to do your diligence in that regard. Where the struggle comes in is as you move through the search process, people become very uneasy about change, right? Everybody knows that it's coming. But as you start to interview candidates, and candidates come from different places, whether it's internal or the next district over or it's 3 states over, in an age of social media, you really will get inundated with all kinds of information, some of it accurate and some of it inaccurate. So it becomes more difficult for a board to make a decision that's courageous, let's say, when there are so many internal pressures that are going to work against change in that regard, especially when you've had, I mean, I'll say, in my experience, the stronger the leader, the more effective leader you've had, the more difficult it is. In other words, if you had been eagerly looking forward to the transition, right, then you have a little more confidence about making a change that's very different versus when you have a really terrific leader who's been at the helm for some time, it's hard for you to step away from the image of that person and how they led and actually look at specific attributes and what an individual is bringing to the table as far as experience. So all of this information is shared so that you can think about this as your strategy when you're actually building not just the package but also the profile of that candidate. And be ready, be transparent as far as having conversations with your community so they know, hey, for sure our superintendent is moving on, right? And because we can't clone people, we know we have to make some tough decisions. So, any questions just about the candidate pool itself? Okay. We track searches, every search done in the state of Michigan, regardless who does it. So you'll hear all kinds of things. The average number of applications is about 22 for a search in Michigan, regardless of the size of the district. Now, some firms don't necessarily share that information with you. In other words, they give you a number, they don't give you access to those applications. And so that becomes a little more challenging for you to discern as far as, because we'll have anything anywhere from 10 to 12 candidates we're working with in any given search who decide not to actually put their paperwork in because they're waiting to see if there's going to be interest that comes through kind of another way. It's very political, as you can imagine, because of what's at risk. And so just ask good questions, stay dialed in. Let's move on. Okay, so you guys have taken a ton of training with MASB. I know that you're already very knowledgeable as a board, as a whole. But I do like to remind boards that choosing a superintendent is really probably the most important decision that you're going to make. That is actually based in evidence, right? So when we take a look at superintendent tenure and what kind of an impact it has on student achievement, there is a direct correlation. And you start to realize those gains. In other words, the district starts to benefit from the tenure of that superintendent as soon as 2 years. So while you're very hung up in the here and now right now, especially because you have this, compressed timeline and this need to get moving quickly, note that when you're looking at candidates, you really want to be thinking about 5, 7, 8 years down the road. Now, that's not really what the average tenure is of a superintendent, right? The national data will tell us that the average tenure is around 4 years, depending on what source you're looking at and whether it's an urban, suburban, or rural district. That will vary. But you, given kind of Livonia's history, you're wanting to beat the odds on that. So you're looking at somebody who can not just be a leader now, but a leader 5, 7, 8 years down the road for sure. So this last bullet on this slide that talks about board leadership. The clearer the picture of the type of a leader a board is seeking, the easier it is for the search firm to find that individual. That's hard work. So at the point in time where you're actually shaping the candidate profile, now the profile is a document that says, here's the individual we're looking for. They have this, that, right? We're actually describing the individual that you're looking for. Why that's such an important document? And it's funny because I have worked with people who will say, well, aren't they all the same? Well, they shouldn't be. I mean, they really should be reflective of the individual that you're looking for. And that, why it's important is that's the lens that you're holding up to every candidate, right? And you're assessing them through it. And so, particularly people who have experience in hiring in their professional careers, or they have kind of been through this before in a superintendent search, sometimes they'll say to me, Donna, I'm not worried about that. I'll know the person when I see him. And I get it that people have good instincts and maybe they have a lot of experience at it. The problem is this isn't one person making a hire. This is a board comprised of 7 individuals making a hire. So that need for you to really work together and come up with that profile is going to be very important, because ultimately you all want to rally around one candidate. So you need to be on the same page as far as what you're looking for. I feel like I'm talking a lot.
You're supposed to. That's the idea. Go ahead.
All right. So this graphic, which was also in the proposal, I think in blue in the proposal, but this is this high-level overview of search. And I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it. What I would rather do is show you some detail that is in this particular presentation that I provided to you that's going to be useful to you now and in the future. So this first section is talking about the preparation phase. But if you'll flip and look at the page that looks like this that says preparation phase, okay? So let me just talk you through what you're looking at. So this first column is really showing you what the search firm is working on generally during that time. The middle column is talking about really what the board is concerned about at that time in the preparation phase. And this last one is really referring to what the district is worried about during that time. Because no matter what, this is going to be a burden on the district. I mean, there's just no two bones about it. There's no firm that can come in and do a search without really being in close partnership with whoever's responsible in the district, and also oftentimes some additional, like the secretary, because of the posting of the meetings, communications, things like that. So we like to make you fully aware of that so you can kind of see the big picture. So for each phase of search, I've provided this level of detail so that you can get a sense of kind of what's really happening. Like I said, it'll be useful to you either way. But so know that in the beginning it's about, obviously, establishing the specific timeline that is going to work for you. We like to work on really getting that salary range immediately. Now, sometimes boards don't like to do that, but my advice is to be as transparent as possible. Establish a range of roughly $20,000, so from X to X. Just base salary. You don't have to necessarily build it out in its entirety. Also, it's not too soon to start working on a draft contract. Now, obviously, way down the road, when you find the candidate that you're looking for, they're going to want to make some changes to it. That's normal. But the goal that I recommend is by the time you're looking at finalists, you have some draft contract language that can be shared with both, sometimes you have 2 or 3 finalists. And that way, they know exactly what they can expect from a board. A board that I worked with this year in a very large district said, listen, we have a 1-page contract. Nobody should come here who isn't willing to work under a 1-page contract. So it was very important to them, right, that the candidate was willing to work under those circumstances. And so the more transparent you can be about salary, the more transparent you can be about contract, the less challenges you'll have later on when you're actually trying to kind of pull it all together. Yes?
Donna, would you, does MASB guide a board in salary ranges as far as based on our size district to give us help in making sure that we're in target area where we need to be so we can be competitive?
We do. So at that first planning meeting, what we would bring forward for you is an analysis of comparable compensation. We would also bring forward a preliminary posting. So it doesn't have the candidate profile yet, but it has all the other kind of pertinent information so that we can get the position posted right away. Like, obviously not the same size, but when we met with Redford Union, we had the posting up the next day because they were so concerned about time. We also bring forward at that point in time a draft of the stakeholder survey so that you can get a sense of, if you're comfortable with the stakeholder survey that we're recommending, it can be live literally that night so we can start driving people to it to get their input. And so you should expect something very similar from anybody that you're working with. Obviously, go ahead.
One question on the stakeholder survey, how do you get that information out to the public and to the staff?
Sure. So we have a couple of ways. So while we do an electronic survey, we also recommend face-to-face meetings. And the reason for that is that it helps us get a better understanding of the district. It also, for people who really need to talk some things out, it provides an avenue for them to do that. So like when I worked with Troy, I think we did 11 stakeholder meetings. because they had some very specific circumstances there with their teachers, so we probably did a little more than we needed to, but we wanted to make sure that everybody's voice was heard. So between the face-to-face meetings and those focused conversations, and then the online survey itself, I take all of that information and analyze it, and what I'm looking for are sort of those major themes that emerge, and then I would present that to you in a public meeting. And so what that does is, I think it adds a lot of credibility to the process, right? Stakeholders feel like their voice has been heard, and they see that, right? Now, sometimes for me, that means that I have to have, tough conversations. I don't anticipate that here, but know that the commitment that I made to MASB when I accepted this position is that I bring integrity to the process. So if I find something out, I'm definitely going to have that conversation with you so that you know it. Generally speaking, it's more about kind of mid-course corrections, right? So it's kind of a nip and a tuck, small things here, but still, boards like to be aware of it. So all that's reported, and that's the context for the conversation when we shape that profile, right? So you have all that information at that point in time as far as what the stakeholders are saying and thinking. And it's not just about, the personal attributes or the qualifications. It's also about, hey, what are we doing really well here in Livonia? And when you think about what's going on in the environment in the next 3 to 5 years, what do you think are some things we might need to worry about, right? Because the world's changing around us. Those are the kinds of things you want to be thinking of when you're choosing your next leader. So, and I would be happy to, I can send that to you guys if you want to see it before, then I can kind of show you one that we've done recently so you get a sense of that. So then we would work in an open meeting and really flesh out that candidate profile. Usually it's a terrific process and people feel very confident about it after the fact. And because you've done such a really good job of getting people's perspectives on that end, and that's what you're using ultimately when you're making the decision, right? That's what you're going to continue to point stakeholders to as you move through the process. Hey, we said we were looking for this type of an individual. When we compare, experience, qualifications, this really appears to be, kind of the candidate that we're looking for. So, I think it's a confidence bolster all the way across. I mean, it gives people a lot of confidence in the transparency and also how you're going about doing it. Any other questions just about kind of preparation? Go ahead.
One more question. Your candidates pool, do you search nationwide or strictly in Michigan or Midwest, or where do you try to target from?
Well, I work with a board on that. I mean, quite specifically. So, and I know this might, sometimes when you hear about practices of another board, people are like, really? I didn't know that. So sometimes I'll work with a board and they'll say, we feel pretty confident that our next superintendent is going to come from a 100-mile radius of where we are right now, or is going to come from kind of this area of Michigan. Now, while that may seem odd, the reason for that is it has to do with culture. And they're feeling like if things are going a certain way, they want somebody that understands the culture of what's happening there. Now, I've worked with boards who said, nope, nothing doing. We want to absolutely cast the widest net as we possibly can. In our case, because we're the school board association, there's a school board association in every state, and most of them do executive searches as well. So we have a national group, NAS, that I referred to in the proposal, and so we meet regularly and we regularly explore candidates together. So I can tell you, before I came here today, I probably had 6 inquiries from fellows in other states checking up on Michigan candidates that were looking in other states, and the same happens in the reverse. But I do want to say something. We don't have a set pool of candidates. That's a very old school notion of how recruiting is done, right? So what you want to have confidence in is that we have a broad reach and that we can attract the right kind of candidate that you'd be looking for. And not that we have a stable of people who are waiting for us to place them, right? We work for boards, we don't work for candidates, right? Headhunters work for candidates, that's not what we do. We have a list of some 600 folks that we communicate with regularly. Obviously, I think in the case of what's happening here, I mean, you're a large district, a successful district, and I think that we must be more selective than that. So a lot of personal recruiting would need to happen here, to be sure. Yep.
When you say personal recruiting, once we get our candidate profile together, does that mean then if you know of individuals who are meeting those qualifications, that you would actually actively go out and let them know on a one-to-one basis that there's an opening that you think that they may be qualified for, and actively recruit them?
Yep, let me speak to that for a second.
Yeah.
So because changing positions as a superintendent is such a high-risk position, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because basically there's kind of a gamble there, right? When you apply for a position, you may or may not get it, and there's some trust that could be lost back home in the process. And so it actually takes a terrific amount of personal recruiting. I'll speak specifically to Wayne Risa. So just candidly, in the case of Wayne Risa, we struggled with recruiting because there were such strong candidates who they knew were in the hunt, right? And so, that was a challenge. In several of the conversations that we had, we may talk 4 or 5 times with a candidate before they make a decision about whether or not to actually hit submit for their materials. There were probably, I'll say 5 candidates that I fully expected to see in that search who really felt like once they had conversations in the community that they knew that Randy was going to get it. And so they said, it's not worth the risk for me because things are going so well with my board. So why that's relevant to you is it's not about calling them once or twice. It is about an ongoing conversation that you're having literally right up and sometimes past the deadline with candidates, because they're going to be very dialed into everything that's happening here. So like one of the first conversations, if you decided you were going to work with MASB, and even if you don't, one of the first conversations you have to have is about internal candidates. If you have good internal candidates here, you have to have the conversation. I mean, I actually recommend to boards, if these are strong internal candidates, to pre-interview them. Like if they're a possibility, before you go live with a full search, let's fully vet their candidacy. And the reason why I say that is the entire field is going to know it. I mean, understand that while it may seem like a big state and the Midwest is a big area and the country's big, know that if you're a superintendent, it's a pretty lonely job, right? There's only one person in your area that has that. So you're going to develop relationships all over the state and all over the country. And so they watch what's happening. And the first thing a smart candidate's going to do is call the person who's leaving and say, hey, what's the scoop? Do you have a strong internal there? So strong internal candidates need to be addressed. That's an important piece, regardless of who you're working with, because it affects the field. And the other piece of it is, if you know that there are candidates that you want to see in the mix, superintendents who you've heard of, you have relationships with other school board members across the state or in the Midwest who say to you, this has been a really terrific person, we love the superintendent, he's done a really great job, or you've read about them in the paper, you need to let your search consultant know that right away. There's the cat and mouse is not useful in this process. The more kind of forthcoming you can be, the better job your consultant, no matter who they are, is going to be able to pull them in. So to go back to your question, personal recruiting has to be done, and it has to be done vigorously, but it also has to be done honestly. I mean, I don't ever mislead a candidate. When they say, hey, Donna, do they have a strong internal candidate? I'll say, well, they have a strong internal candidate. However, the board feels very confident that they need to do a search, that they need to be sure. And then a candidate makes a decision about whether their hat's in the ring or not. Do you want to add any? I mean, because I know you know, so, I mean, no? Okay. Yeah, it's pretty small field, believe it or not, as far as people kind of knowing what's going on out there. Let's talk about how, though. So I mentioned that we have that national network. Now, we also, of course, I think because of being an association, right? I mean, we have close relationships with, obviously, MASA. So, for example, we're the only search firm that goes to the State Superintendent's Conference. And we do both a career fair there, and we also exhibit. And then, of course, we also have, kind of social engagements with them as well. The reason for that is so that we can get to know them as individuals and know kind of what their aspirations are. If I have talked to somebody who feels passionate and wants to stay in a district until they finish the bond that they're working on now, or until they finish kind of this next piece, I don't need to distract them, right? If I know that they're committed to their district. So part of it is about developing relationships, for sure. Beyond that, obviously, that's kind of one of the advantages of being part of NAS. So we have a presence at a presence at the national conference as well, and meet with candidates there. So collectively, especially the big states, I mean, we have terrific access. When we're talking to out-of-state candidates, though, we're very clear with them. We want to know why they want to come. We want to understand exactly not just the circumstances that they're leaving behind, but also what draws them back to Michigan. Because, when you compare Michigan's retirement system to other states, it could be that they've finished their career there, they've retired from the system, and they're ready to kind of move into their next career in another state, or they have family here. So we try to get the full story and then share that with the board, because those are the kinds of questions that you're going to get. If they don't come up at this table, you're going to get them from the community anyway. Social media really has changed things a lot, to be sure. So we've started to talk about recruiting. I mean, we kind of eased into this conversation with your question. So know that as you kind of flip through this presentation, there's some detail on the recruitment phase in here. And part of it is, listen, nothing is more important than the personal relationships and the personal recruiting. There's no doubt about that. But visibility is also important. So you certainly want to be thinking about, is advertising important? A district your size, I would say yes, it is. You're going to want to be looking at advertising in a couple different places, and those are going to be, I would say any firm's probably going to recommend the same ones. That's probably in Ed Weekly. They have a top school jobs site, and then of course AASA has a job board as well, and it would make sense. So, those are not terrifically expensive, but they certainly help with visibility. When we work with districts your size, one of the first phone calls that we make is generally to Ray Tillman at Middle Cities, so that we can kind of talk with him about, okay, who do you know, who have you seen out there that really makes sense and would do a good job in this district. So part of it is using that network to get kind of additional recommendations of people, so that's really useful. Your firm is going to be, especially with this, right, sort of the recruitment almost has to be a blitzkrieg, right? I mean, it has to be really get the information out there as soon as possible, and then have kind of a robust network. In our case, and I mentioned this in the proposal, we've done a good job, I think, in the last couple of years of really intentionally recruiting retired superintendents to build a network. So we have an area network of retired superintendents whose job it is to just kind of continue to make phone calls in the field and face-to-face visits. We pay them to do that, and we track how many communications they have a year. So I know that last year my area representatives had contact with 300 superintendents in the state, and they recorded every one of those conversations for me, so that I can get a sense of kind of where the issues were out there. In addition to that, we have a whole host of search consultants, right? So most of them are retired superintendents, but not all of them. And so whenever any one of us is working on a search, we're working all together, kind of funneling them, saying, hey, you should talk to so-and-so, have you talked to so-and-so, can I call that person for you? So it's pretty intense. I would imagine that any firm that you're working with should be sharing that kind of a vigorous effort with you. And the same thing happens as far as exploring candidates once you get down to the vetting piece. Because, a resume is just going to tell, a story, if you will, right? And interviews are going to give you some sense of the individual. But really, there's a whole lot of just investigative work that has to happen. And that takes a lot of kind of shaking of the bushes. I usually tell boards that a story about a search that we were doing in mid-Michigan, southern mid-Michigan. And somebody had heard from a neighboring district that one of the finalists had something, inappropriate in their background. And that had been shared on social media. And so we spent 12 hours investigating it. I mean, quite literally, because we had to go back to 20 years ago when it was supposed to have happened and who actually was in the district at the time. Now, you know that people move, right? So it was a little bit like pulling a thread on a sweater to try to get back to who actually knew exactly what happened. Because we've been around so long and because we have such a great network, we were able to do that. And in this case, it wasn't true. Right. I mean, so on both sides of this, you want to make sure that somebody can really do the thorough digging, true or untrue, so that you have kind of the full facts when you're making a decision. It's harder than it used to be, just because of kind of how people make flip remarks now via social media, and sometimes we've also seen just a lot more, I guess, vitriol, I would say, when it comes to just unhappy situations. Nobody who has held the position of superintendent could possibly have made everyone happy all the time. So you're going to have to deal with some folks who had some concerns one way or another. And so part of it is just having a clear picture of what you believe is important, right? Important decisions that may have upset some people and good decisions for kids ultimately. Let's step ahead. Unless you have any questions about recruitment, let me check time here. So we're at 6:40.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're going to be so knowledgeable after this, right? Every other interview is just going to breeze by. So I guess I segued a little bit into that. So let's just talk about kind of some of the differences. So MASB's practice, we will ask you to maintain full confidentiality during this process because we do assure candidates confidentiality until such time as they accept an interview. But know that we're also going to give you full access to the pool. So what that means is that while we will work with you and we will give you kind of a cover that says, based on a vigorous screening of the candidates and a rigorous paper screening of the candidates, here's who we believe your top tier candidates are, you have access to the full applicant pool. Now the reason for that is because you may know something we don't know, right? I mean, sometimes a name to you could mean something very different than it does to us when we're doing our screening. So I'll give you an example of a very large district in Michigan whose search that we did, and there was a person who was terrific, but probably in our estimation we wouldn't have put them in a top tier just because they lacked superintendent experience. Well, the fact of the matter is that person had been a very successful principal in that district, and that is exactly who that board wanted. Because they knew something about that individual, right, just from having been there before that we would not necessarily have gotten through, right, in the paper screening. We're talking about a large district where we're looking for some superintendent experience. And so that's why we think it's important that you have access to the whole pool. Now, at the same time, we don't expect that you're going to go through hundreds and hundreds of pages. We provide that information to you, but that's why we give you that top tier, here's what our team has come up with, but here's the full list in alpha order in case you want to flip through it to find out some additional information for yourself. That's something that is different. I think that not every search firm is going to do that, and some boards love it, and some boards will say, Donna, I would have been happy with just the top tier. I said, well, then you can just look at the top tier, right? I mean, if that's what's important to you. But our practice is to, again, try to be transparent.
Can I ask a question?
Go right ahead.
Donna, I'm trying to figure out in my head. You talk about confidentiality, but then you talk about transparency. How do we square the two?
Ooh, I like that. It's a good question. So at the point in time we're meeting together to actually narrow the pool. So in other words, we have this pool of applicants and now we're trying to identify who we're going to invite for an interview. Every one of those applicants will be assigned a number. And so when we're having our conversation, we'll refer to them in this open meeting by number.
Okay, so we're talking about the identity is confidential.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So when we're having a conversation, you'll just refer to them by number, and I'll ask that you just not mention the district that they're in. Because usually if
Okay.
you mention a district, then it's kind of a giveaway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You at least narrow down the potentials.
Yeah, truly. But you can have a really robust conversation that way, whether we're kind of exploring the depth of someone's experience or some of their accomplishments in a given district. I mean, those are conversations that you can have, and I think it's beneficial for the public to hear. And yet, we'll work through that in such a way that then we kind of narrow it down to, generally speaking, we recommend that you interview between 5 and 7 candidates first round. Now, same time, I would never recommend you interview somebody that you don't see a reason to do that. So I'm not somebody that recommends courtesy interviews. Someone kind of joked with me a little bit this year and said, well, how do you feel about political interviews? Right? I mean, that's a little different. And, board leaders know that. So those are conversations that we'll have at this table as we work through it. And we'll just do it by number so that names aren't known. Interviews are so deceiving. I have sat through thousands now and know that someone can interview really well and maybe not be the right person for you. I mean, truly. And this, or the reverse, right? I mean, and so work with your search firm, and then also as individual board leaders, really do your diligence in trying to get a full measure of this individual's, what they're bringing to the table. A track record of success sure goes a long way, right? Not to say that there won't sometimes be hiccups that have to be explained. But by and large, if somebody has really been successful in the position and kind of has what it takes that's identified in that profile, then you should be kind of working to do your due diligence. Some of the boards I work with kind of like to make some calls themselves, and we'll help them do that, give them the information. Others want us to kind of do the full and then report out. So those are things that we would work on according to, what you felt your comfort level was. I don't know if you read the Grosse Point, their article when they made their choice, but the board president, I think at that point, said, I made several phone calls, I liked what I heard. I mean, I think in their case, they felt really good about being able to say that they had done that. So that's really subject. Do you have a question?
I do,
Go
thank you.
ahead.
Are visits to the final candidate school districts encouraged by board members?
I would say it's 50-50. So if you're asking me if I encourage it, I am going to tell you to do whatever it takes to give you confidence, okay? Now, when I say it's 50-50, some board members I talk to say, I loved it. It made such a huge difference. It was terrific. Other boards say, oh, it was all choreographed. It was ridiculous. But let me say that one of the searches that I worked on this year, the candidate, they had one finalist, and this individual just had a terrific idea about how they wanted to go about the site visit, and it's probably the way I would recommend them from now on, which is this individual made up a list of some 30 different places in their community that people could stop and kind of the times, roughly like windows where they would be available, met with them in the morning, gave them the information, and said, have a good day. So it really wasn't choreographed in the way kind of some of those old school site visits were. And I'll tell you, the board president wasn't really keen on a site visit, and he said, whoa, that was amazing. I mean, and he was so glad that he did it. Obviously, another board member did it as well. And so I think if you're going to do a site visit, something like that is not so canned, or two site visits, I think that can be very meaningful to a group, and also meaningful to your community too, versus the ones that are very structured. So I think it's about how it's done. Good question.
No.
Okay, just want to make sure. So, just from a, kind of give you a sense of a support. So, we approach search with a turnkey mentality. So we're going to work with you kind of from beginning to the very end. That includes support with contract, negotiations if that's needed, but really every step along the way. So when we talk about interviews, we're going to work hard on the interview questions that are going to help you get to that profile. We're going to encourage you to dig into that as well, share them with you ahead of time, kind of get your best thinking and revisions. We're not going to talk about them in a public meeting like by full sentence. Again, those would be numbered, but it's very transparent. So we get those done. The second interviews, we recommend not be as formal as the first. So generally speaking, when MASB does a search, those second interviews feel much more like informal conversations. We might talk about strengths and challenges and start with about 5 questions just to give you a high level of comfort to begin the conversation, but we would encourage you to ask follow-up questions and let the conversation flow naturally. Now, the reason for that is those first round are so structured. Same questions, all the candidates, you're comparing them, right, against each other. By the time you get to the second round, you're really trying to explore strengths, possible issues, right? You're really kind of going down the rabbit hole with each one. And so we're going to set up a framework that's going to support that. Let's check in. So I think, between the detail that's provided in these slides, I know it's a little excessive. I didn't intend to talk through it. And then that follow-up piece, I guess that's the one thing I should mention is that, remember when I talked about the area rep? those retired superintendents that we had recruited to make visits. Part of the visits they do are to superintendents that are newly placed, not new superintendents, but newly placed. And so know that as the School Board Association, we're going to continue to work with you beyond the search. So we're going to have a superintendent who's going to reach out to the superintendent that is placed here. And then as a leadership side of things, we're going to reach out as the organization that works with your board to check in on how things are. We have over time developed a pretty robust retreat framework that we do just as part of the search when you're ready. And that really is to help you kind of get to know the individual, establish parameters. I mean, it really would be kind of I would describe it as a governance workshop, but know that we're going to focus on building good relationships between the board and superintendent and also laying that groundwork to just make sure that you have clear expectations, that the individual knows what those expectations are, and vice versa. And so from this conversation all the way through until after the individual is placed and kind of well underway in the district, we're going to continue to work with you. We don't obviously do this for the money. We do it because it's a really important service to boards. So that said, and I know certainly did not cover every detail, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to, whether it's about us or anything else, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Are there questions from board members? Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
A couple, thank you. Donna, does MASB only do searches in Michigan? In other words, 4 districts in Michigan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We do only do searches for boards in Michigan, and the reason for that is because we have counterparts in other states that do theirs. So in other words, they would be offended if we did a search.
You don't want to step on anybody's toes.
Well, that's part of the cooperative working agreement that we have. It's a good question, though.
Okay, but the pool can be nationwide, but the districts are Michigan. Do you have any idea what the average tenure is for superintendents that you've actually placed?
Well, me personally or MASB?
MASB.
I mean, that's part of the challenge, right? So, yeah, the average tenure for superintendents placed by MASB is about 8 years. But that sounds really high, and the reason for that is, did you see the list that I provided to you? And it's because those less challenged districts offset the more challenged districts, right? And so when you look at the number as a whole, it's not very useful to you. That's part of why I think when I sort of first started to talk, I said I was surprised that nobody was doing due diligence on exactly how long superintendents were staying in Michigan. So we have a very thorough database of the last 2 years, and ultimately I'd like to be able to give that information, not just about MASB, but about all search firms, whether you're a rural, suburban, or urban district in Michigan. I just don't have enough information yet.
It sounds like perhaps the more rural, the tenure is longer.
It used to be true. What we're finding now is a lot of turnover in those districts because they're suffering from enrollment, right? So if you don't have the numbers, you can't necessarily kind of keep things going. So that's where you start seeing a lot of shared service arrangements and shared job kind of positions, superintendent, principal, that kind of thing. So that is certainly skewing the numbers in Michigan as well, too.
Okay.
So let's get to the heart of your question, though, because the heart of your question is, do we do a good job in supporting boards in this? Well, I think we do a great job, and part of that is because, I tell boards about this kind of no surprise guarantee. So because we're not beholden to candidates, if you ask me a question, even if you don't ask me the question, I'm going to share with you everything I found about a candidate, because it's not my decision to make, it's yours. So it's my job to do the full investigation and to give you the best information that I can lay hands on at the time about all the candidates. Ultimately, it is your decision. I am a facilitator of a process. Now, I have worked with boards who have, for whatever reason, felt like, hey, we really like this individual. And I have said, okay, I need you to know I have some very serious concerns. You hired me, and so I have to tell you I have some very serious concerns. Ultimately, it's your decision. That's definitely part of the challenge. I certainly I haven't had any placements that I've worked with yet that have been an issue, but it does naturally happen.
Okay. Last question that I have. Do you have, I don't know what you would call it, a policy or a rule of thumb that if you place a candidate somewhere and you're searching for another district, that you won't recruit that candidate for a period of time?
We do. It's a practice. It's not a policy.
Okay.
So 2 years.
Okay.
So that's the answer to that question. Now, I understand it has been controversial in the state in the past. The challenge from a recruiting perspective is if somebody wants to leave, they're going to, regardless of who recruits them. I mean, just know that, right? And so, we walk a weird kind of line, right, as a school board association and a search firm. It's like, well, this is kind of awkward. My position is to just be, authentic and honest about it. So the commitment that we've made, kind of our executive team, as we've met at MASB, is to say we wouldn't actively recruit for 2 years after a placement. It's bad practice generally for them. When I see a candidate in a pool who hasn't been in a district 2 years, I call them and say, what are you doing in this pool? I mean, it doesn't matter who placed them. And I listen to the story, like, why are you in the hunt? I don't understand. And they'll say, well, I'll tell you, Donna, 4 of my board members turned over. It's a completely different board. And I'll say, all right, now I know the story. And if the board asks, at least I can explain kind of why you look to be jumping. And so it's a great question. It is very complicated.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. The first one is, how many similar searches is MASB currently involved in?
Well, this is off-season for search. So generally speaking, kind of search season is usually roughly December to May. And so we just finished up Wayne Risa, as you are painfully aware of.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's a strike against me.
I know. It is a weird thing. Another consultant of ours is working on Redford Union because they had kind of a late circumstance as well. So, one advantage to the timing that you have right now is you would have our full attention. And when I say our full, I mean really the entire organization. Because we do have a lot of resources to bring to bear in this. It's not just about our executive search team. Obviously, our legal team and our marketing team can be very useful in these efforts as well.
Okay. And my second question is, off the top of your head, are you anticipating any specific challenges finding a candidate pool for Livonia? And if so, what would those challenges be?
A good question. I don't have enough information yet. So I need to have some conversations with you all to fully understand, like when I mentioned that, kind of the landscape of what's the situation internally. I need to better understand that before I can answer that question. I also need to know if there is kind of a bridesmaid out there. Every once in a while, there's somebody that left the district and is kind of waiting to come back, because they left to get on their leadership trajectory to eventually come back. I feel like and so I need more information to answer that. Generally speaking, simply because this is such a large, successful district, I think we have to work hard to make sure that you have a pool that you can be confident in.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Mrs. Laura?
Thank you. Who's going to be assigned to our search?
Good question. So I would be, obviously, whenever it's kind of a large district with unique needs, I always give it my full attention. Now, in the case of Wayne Risa, I partnered with Michael M. Law because of his experience with an ISD specifically. In this case, I would lead the search. And I would also, I think I put in the proposal, I would also have Dr. Rodney Green, who's done a ton of searches in Michigan, and he's done a really good job, partner with me. We work together in Troy to great effect for them. And also, I think I mentioned that I recruited Bill Pearson from South Lyon, who's just retired and eager to get to work on search. So this would be the first one that he would kind of work on too. But that's going to be really advantageous from a network perspective because he's so fresh from the field. So that was part of the strategy on that. Also the understanding of kind of a large, complex district, right?
Can you tell, I don't think it was in your, we looked at a couple proposals. I don't think your experience and qualifications were listed in the proposal. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So my experience is actually in business and HR. So if I look familiar, it's probably because many, many years ago I was the executive director of the state PTA. So I have been to your Founders Day, I've been to every one of your buildings, many, many years ago. And so I was the exec of the state PTA and actually left there to do leadership development for secondary principals. So I worked for Jim Ballard for about 5 years, and then when Jim retired, went into private practice as a consultant, again, still working in leadership development, specifically for education. And so I was actually doing contract work for MASB when they recruited me to the position, and I really didn't want to leave consulting. I was enjoying it quite a bit. So, I have obviously extensive experience from a facilitating perspective. National PTA was very specific in training me to work in all different kinds of communities. So I love that aspect of the work. On the HR side of things, as an exec myself previously, and then also because my degrees are in business, I bring some considerable expertise to that. Now, I will say that search is its own creature, to be sure. And so this full immersion in the work over the last 2 years, and having no obligation other than really to serve boards well, I feel like, I get a little weird about this, I feel like educating our kids shouldn't count on them being in the right place at the right time. And so kind of the spirit of the work I did at PTA actually still very much applies to this. And I know some people might not get that. I mean, you really got to understand that PTA is a children's advocacy group to get it. I have goosebumps. And so I bring that heart to the work. And I'm proud of what we've accomplished in the last couple of years at MASB, and they're proud of it too.
Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
You named several individuals that would consult with you and help you. The background of those, anyone a former superintendent or in education?
Sure, both of them are. So, so Dr. Rod Green actually retired from East China some time ago. He left for a position in Pennsylvania, then retired from there and is back here. He lives in Brighton now.
Okay.
Now, so East China is kind of in the thumb. I don't know if you kind of know where that is as a district, but it's a fair-sized district. Rod has really worked very hard. He's worked with me for 2 years as a search consultant. Every superintendent has their supporters and detractors. I have to tell you, he's a fabulous search consultant. He knows the network very well, and he does a great job of recruiting. And so like I said, I worked with him in Troy, and we did a great job, and I thought he did a great job in particular there. The other person I mentioned is Bill Pearson. So Bill is just retired from South Lyon, and so part of it is really accessing kind of that full network that Bill has, but also I think Bill brings some important things to bear as far as, like I said, what you're looking for in a candidate when it's a large district with a lot of moving parts and complex concerns. There's nothing simple about it. And it's funny because I reached out to him. He's getting ready to head out of the country for, I think, 10 days. And when I reached out to him about it, he's like, I want to help. I said, well, I'm going to go meet with them and we'll see. But anybody who's been in that position knows how important the decision that you're about to make, is. And so I think they bring, very important expertise to the work as well.
I know this is not predictable, but can you give us an estimate of how long you think this process will take?
Sure. I mean,
There's a lot of factors that go into it.
Right. A standard search is 14 weeks. This one isn't going to take that long, right? And so
Right.
I think where the challenge is we would need to get together right away and really lay out, because part of it depends on how quickly we can get those stakeholder sessions scheduled, right? I mean, the survey itself, if it's well publicized and we have a lot of kind of standard press releases and give you kind of a checklist of all the places you want to make sure that that's published as well, that's going to do its thing. But those face-to-face meetings are important, and they're important even if no one shows up. And that always surprises people when I say it, but it's the fact that you made the offer, right? I mean,
Right.
and so getting those scheduled and getting them scheduled in a way that makes sense. I like to have meetings with cabinet level staff. I like to have meetings, obviously, with all professional staff at the different levels, grade wise, and then support staff, of course, as well. And sometimes we have to offer a couple of those depending on the timing of things. And then, of course, we haven't even started to talk about your community and parent stakeholders and business stakeholders as well. So there's quite a few meetings that need to be scheduled.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. If the need arises, does MSAB MASB have the capability to help us find an interim superintendent?
Sure, sure, we do that regularly as a matter of course. So that would be part of that first conversation as well, that planning meeting where we're figuring out exactly what the lay of the land is. Better that you do that if need be, better to make a good decision than a quick decision.
Are there any other questions from board members? No. Alrighty. Thank you so very much for sharing your time and the considerable amount of information for our board. It is truly appreciated.
Thank you.
Mr. Winry, do you have any other closing comments?
I don't.
No. Alrighty. Okay, we're going to take a few-minute recess to allow Donna to gather her things and so forth, and our next presenter to come into the room. So we'll be at recess for a few moments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna.
Good evening. We are back from our brief recess to allow the representative from the MASB to gather their things. And we have before us right now Charles Coleman from BWP. Mr. Winry, would you like to do an introduction?
Dr. Coleman would be the co-lead consultant from BWP, and he would be working with Deborah Hill. I've been in contact with Deborah Hill, who is the managing director and would be the co-lead consultant. Unfortunately, Deborah Hill can't be here tonight. Dr. Hill is on a tarmac in Chicago, and the same fate my son recently met on a business trip, so I feel bad for her, but Dr. Coleman will present, and as necessary, we have access to Dr. Hill.
Yes, in fact, with that in mind, if you would permit, I wanted to put her on the phone via a conference call,
Okay.
if that's permissible. And that way she can hear the presentation. She can provide clarity relative to some of the questions that you might have, and also share her perspective as the managing partner, as well as one of the board of directors for BWP and Associates.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's see if we can get Deborah here rather quickly. Dr. Hill?
Yes.
This is Charles Coleman. I'm here with the Board of Directors of the Livonia Public Schools, and we're going to have you on speakerphone, and you'll be with us to feel free to interject at any point during the presentation itself.
That's wonderful. I apologize for the rain delay. Wasn't my doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. Thank you. Glad you can join us at least through technology.
That's right. And today's time, it's of immense help. Electronics just helps expedite things and saves a lot of time. So, Dr. Hill, we're going to go ahead and proceed. As I had indicated to you, Board, we have what I consider to be an executive summary. In addition to Dr. Hill, we also have Dr. Ron Barnes, who not only would be a part of this search process if we're selected, but he brings extensive experience. I trust you've had a chance to review his resume as well. In addition to that, I wanted to say, in reference to the proposal itself, our proposals are very unique. They're customized to your particular needs. There's certain boilerplate components that are part of every search firm's proposal, but ours are designed specifically customized for whatever your particular needs happen to be. A little backdrop information about myself. I'm currently a sitting superintendent. I'm in my 20th year as a superintendent. I'm the superintendent of Joliet Public Schools District 86. We're the fourth largest elementary school district in the state of Illinois. My association and involvement with BWP goes back quite a ways. I've known many of the board of directors for 20-plus years. In fact, the current position in which I hold, the search was coordinated by BWP and Associates 4 years ago. I'll be in my 5th year when I return back to work tomorrow. I'll be starting my 5th year as superintendent.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Deborah, you want to give a little backdrop information about yourself?
Absolutely. Former classroom teacher, curriculum person. I was the director of curriculum, the interim acting assistant superintendent of curriculum, then the assistant superintendent for curriculum, acting superintendent, interim superintendent, and ended up being superintendent of Glenview Northbrook Suburban School just outside of Chicago. In addition to that, I'm currently the managing director of BWP. I've been with BWP for the last 13 years, first as an associate, much like Dr. Charles, and then as a partner, and since November I've become the managing director. So from that perspective, I'm bringing a national experience to the forefront. One of my highlights in terms of my career is I've served on the board and as the immediate past president of ASCD, which is the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, and we are the largest professional educators organization in the country, with the exception of the teachers union. We have about 120,000 members in 119 countries. And so I have not only the national scope, but also international experience as well. As a part of this team, I would be serving as your lead, and Charles would be serving as the co-lead as working through this particular process. I've done a number of searches. I'm pretty selective about the searches that I do, and now as managing director, I really limit the searches, so I would be able to devote a lot of time and attention to Livonia and your needs. I'm currently completing a search in Hartford, Connecticut, with their regional office, looking for an executive director. The intent is that we will be finishing that search this fall. And then again, I'm kind of putting loose the fancy freeze relative to searches because I'm not scheduled at this point to be leading any of the searches, just managing the corporation. Our third member, as Dr. Coleman indicated, is Dr. Ron Barnes. Not only is he an esteemed university professor, but he also is one of the founding members of BWG and Associates, and kind of responsible for the merger between the other two search firms that he joined forces with about 8 years ago. So this particular team has been put together with regards to ensuring that we have someone that has some familiarity with Michigan's school systems and the rules and regulations and laws that pertain to that. Someone that, or people that have had experience doing superintendent searches for a number of years, and someone that has both a national and international scope. And so that's kind of how the three of us have been formulated as a team for this presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's work our way through the PowerPoint if we can. We were initially founded by the Bickett Group with roots in the Midwest, although our focus and scope now is national. We were formed in 2006 through the merger of three national firms, including the oldest search firm in the United States. We were focused on personalized local service with a national presence to support the work of school boards to hire talented leaders. In fact, once the search is completed, the associates or the members of that particular search firm, they continue to work with those particular school superintendents and boards to ensure not only the first but the second but all subsequent years are a smooth transition and work to troubleshoot if there are any issues that may arise. Our goal is to create successful outcomes to benefit students, staff, school boards, and stakeholders. Deborah's given you a backdrop in terms of the partners. She referenced several of the partners. Dr. Ron Barnes, he's one of the founders. He's going to be a part of this search process. We have offices in Illinois, Texas, Washington, D.C. Area, and South Carolina. There are strong connections, as Dr. Hill indicated, with the national and state professional organizations. They're listed here: AASA, which is the National Superintendents Organization, NASB, which you're familiar with, ASCD, that's the National Supervision and Curriculum Development, in which Dr. Hill spoke in reference to having served as its past national president. IESA, the Illinois Association of School Administrators, IASB. Those are the complements to your MASA, MASB. In fact, I'm a former superintendent, as you probably have seen per my resume. Served 10 years as a superintendent of Battle Creek, Michigan. Through that time as superintendent, got to know very well the executive director of the MASA, as well as the new executive director of MASA, the Michigan Association of School Administrators, which happens to be Chris Wygant, recently hired in that capacity. Chris Wygant and I, we go back all the way to Calhoun County when I was serving as the superintendent of Battle Creek. Chris was the superintendent of the Calhoun Intermediate School District. But as you might know, he went from that position to Superintendent Wayne Risa, and then most recently, Executive Director of MASA. I'm also known in the world of the Middle Cities Education Association, where the Executive Director is Ray Tolman. As Dr. Hill indicated, I have extensive experience and knowledge of school governance for the state of Michigan, and also the superintendency, and very well networked with all of the organization. I also know your state superintendent, Mike Flanagan. I assume, did he just retire?
He did.
He just retired,
He did,
that's right.
yes.
I know him very well also. The search process, if we may. Planning meetings with you, the Board of Education. We want to establish search parameters. In other words, you tell us if you want this to be a state-based search encompassing the Midwestern states, or national search. You tell us the scope, and that will be the areas of our focus based on not only our knowledge and experience with individuals here in the state of Michigan, but throughout the Midwest and throughout the nation for that matter. So you determine the level, and we can pursue it from that vantage point. Timelines, the process typically is one whereby we will work backwards. In other words, you tell us when you would like to officially hire a superintendent, and then we'll work backwards from that vantage point. We normally say the process takes about 22 weeks. Feel free to as I go through this presentation, stop me for points of clarity, or to ask any questions along the way. And Deborah, can you hear me still? Dr. Hill?
Yes, I can.
Feel free to interject at any phase of the process if you so desire.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And so again, as I indicated earlier, the objective is to identify any customized services that you want to have provided, so that this search is specifically unique to Livonia Public Schools. Number 2, launch the recruitment efforts. We will implement a massive marketing campaign based on the area that you want us to focus on, be it state, regional, or national. We would post the position on proven websites. We would connect with the MASA, with the Middle Cities Education Association. We would connect with our national networks. We would publish in a host of educational publications, such as Education Week, things of that nature. We also have our own website where the position will be posted as well. And also via our website, you get an opportunity to do a scan, to look at the various current searches that are underway, as well as some of the searches that have been completed over the past years. Number 3 here, conduct audit and develop ideal candidate profile. The very first part of that process would entail a one-on-one meeting with each of you to ask you 3 questions. One, what you consider to be the strengths of Livonia Public Schools? What do you consider to be the concerns, the challenges? And then lastly, what are the skill sets you want the new superintendent to have as a part of his or her qualifications? And then I indicated there were 3 questions, but there also is a 4th question, and that would be any concerns that you want us to consider, whatever they might be. We believe that this process is a transparent one whereby, you're candid with us, we're candid with you, and that way we can find the best candidate to meet your specific needs. So once the individual board meetings are completed with each of you one-on-one, asking those three pertinent questions and then adding that fourth one, if you will, we would also then work with you to identify a focus group. And that would be comprised of the stakeholders that you would identify, school employees, support staff like paraprofessionals, school aides, nurses, secretaries, certificated employees, like classroom teachers, building administrators, members of the various associations, and then that would be the compilation of that particular focus group. They would be asked the same 4 questions. With each particular group, we would pose the same questions for consistency. We would then have one big open forum where you would get an opportunity to invite any and all constituents. Anyone who would want to come to that public meeting would have that opportunity, and they would be given the same questions as well. Then we'd also send out an electronic survey for those that would want to respond. And through all this process, we're ensuring that you're being transparent, open, candid, to listen to all constituents, to give them that opportunity to have some input in determining the qualifications of what the next superintendent should possess. Dr. Hill?
Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
Yeah, let me just add to that. And again, it's at the board's determination. If you don't want all of that input and feedback, then you can minimize that or eliminate that. We suggest that the more input that you get from the community, the more support that you will have for the new superintendent that you hire. So that's the first part. And what ultimately happens is that no individual is identified in any of the focus groups or interviews or surveys, but we look for the themes that run across the majority of all of those groups. And it's almost like magic. What you'll find is that people pretty much have similar opinions about what the positives are, what the concerns are, and what skill sets they would see a new leader needing to have to be successful. Based on that information, then we put together a profile that says, this is what these constituent, you and these constituent groups have said. The board then agrees that, yeah, that makes sense. And then that helps us to identify candidates that kind of meet those qualifications, as well as give candidates information about the district. And so it's a pretty intense process. And again, but you set the parameters for that in terms of how in-depth you want us to be or how surface you want us to be relative to the process. It's the board's responsibility to hire a new superintendent. The community, the staff, that's not part of their job. But it does help for a new superintendent to come in and have support of those groups because they felt that they had a part in the process.
Let me add one other point to that. To Dr. Hill's point, once you have identified the type of superintendent you're looking for, we won't deviate from that. You'll see those same components in the form of qualifications via that profile, via that brochure that would be developed. The next page, the search process steps 4 through 6. Number 4, recruit quality candidates. Contact highly successful school leaders whose experience, background, and talents match the district's candidate profile. Review applications and applicant credentials. That's what we call internal and external scanning. 5, screen candidates to identify 5 to 6 for board interviews. We would, prior to that, have interviewed 10 to 12 applicants who best match the district candidate profile. We would conduct extensive research into a candidate's background, including online profile, The school district here, it says, must also conduct a criminal background check for final candidate prior to employment. Because of our broad network, we would also have personal conversations with individuals. For example, if some of the semifinalists, if you will, are from the state of Michigan, I would be sure to call Chris Wygant, who's the executive director of MASA, as well as Ray Tellman, the executive director of Middle Cities Education Association, and then Deborah would do the same in reference to the IESCD and other networks that we have throughout the state of Michigan. Deborah? Deborah, are you still with us? Dr. Hill?
I should be here.
Okay. And then the next step, number 6, present slate of top candidates to you, the Board of Education. And we would review all those individuals' qualifications. We would spend as much time as needed to thoroughly go over why these 5 or 6 individuals are being recommended to you as the top candidates, matching the qualifications that are reflective in the profile developed by you. Steps 7 through 9, the search process.
Before you go on to that, let
Yes.
me just add that as a part of that, the background checks that we do are not just to review the references that the candidates have listed, but also to touch base with people who actually know the candidates, or from our perspective, someone that we know
Right.
that knows the candidates, so that we can get both the inside and outside scoop on those particular individuals.
In other words, we will make sure that if you're prepared to hire someone, that they don't have ghosts in their closet, that all of a sudden the media is going to capture some old news that is of a negative nature about that respective person that you're looking to offer a contract to. We would make sure that wouldn't happen because of our contacts throughout the nation that would give us an opportunity to have that, what we call it, up close and personal conversation regarding that person's moral standards.
Okay. And Dr. Coleman, I do have a question. You said you'll present to us the 5 and 6 that you recommend that the board pursue.
Yes.
Would this board have access to the list of the 10 or 12 that you have?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And if for some reason you decide that the 6 that we recommended are fine, but you rather remove the 5th one and the 6th one and add 1 or 2 that were part of that larger list of semifinalists, if you will, that is totally your call.
Thank
Yes.
Dr. Coleman, going back to number 4, how aggressively does your firm recruit candidates?
Very aggressively.
Okay.
Our network is so tremendous that it allows us to get the best candidates, given that in any search process, you're going to have a lot of folks that will apply, that will, what I would say, wallpaper their resume with the United States. They'll apply for everything. So we will make sure that the top candidates are coming forth, because we'll make personal calls. We'll have other people make personal calls to encourage various individuals who are outstanding based on what your needs are to actually make application and be a candidate in this screening and selection process. The caveat is, we also tell those individuals, although we're recommending you to apply, we're not guaranteeing you that you will be a semifinalist or finalist. What that does, though, is allows us to have that rich pool by actually contacting, recruiting individuals.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let me just add here that another component of that is there are people out there, particularly once we develop the profile based on the feedback and input that we have that will match what you're looking for that may not even know that they're looking for a job. But that once we have and I was one of those people. Once we have that information, then it allows us to go to our network and say, we have a school district that is looking for someone who has experience with a successful referendum, which you have already done, so you have that under your belt. But we target looking for people that will match the qualifications that come out of your profile. And again, when I was hired as a superintendent in District 31, I was not looking for a job. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to be a superintendent when I grew up. However, the search person, again, from DWP, said they're looking for someone who really is advanced thinking and curriculum development to be the superintendent in this small district. And so that was what I brought to the table in terms of my interviews, of my curriculum knowledge and curriculum experience with what they were looking for. So again, there may be people out there that will meet the criteria that you set, that didn't realize that Livonia even existed, but would find it both a challenge as well as we do really well working with your system. Our task is to try to make a perfect marriage for you, between you and your school superintendent, to take you to the next level. I've had an opportunity to look at your website and review the things that are happening in the district, and you're very impressive. You're gonna have people coming out of woodwork to work for your system based on some of the things that you have in place already, and that's a credit to your previous leaders and the board's leadership. And so you want to take that to the next level, and sometimes that means going beyond just the people who see the posting and choose to apply.
So that's the recruitment piece, the initiation on our part. Okay, continue with the search process, step 7 through 9. Prepare Board of Ed for interviewing candidates. We would outline the process for interviews, identify key questions to ask, and rubrics to evaluate and rate responses. But at the same time, since this is a process that's customized for you, you might determine that there are several other questions you want to add, or there may be a question or two that you may opt to have omitted from the list of questions. Review what is and what is not permissible in an interview. Provide strategies for building consensus around the finalists. Number 8, board interview of finalists. And we've known that could be one person you want to talk to based on all of the previous interviews. And if things work out, you might decide, well, we want to offer that person. We don't want to talk to the second finalist. You may want to talk to all 3 finalists because you've talked to them already 1 or 2 other times. And so for comparative purposes, you may want to bring all 3 forward.
One of the hardest parts about the search process from my perspective is the scheduling of your first round interviews and your second round interviews, because if you have 5 or 6 candidates that you are interviewing, you would, first of all, you'd like to have all of your board members there to be able to participate in that. Typically, those interviews last about an hour and a half. And so just being able to schedule 7 people to be available at one time over a couple of days to get those interviews done is a challenge. And then the second challenge is that you get down to 2 or 3 finalists. Typically, those finalists then come back to the district for a day, and they're interviewed over 2 or 3 days, depending on the number of finalists that you have. So again, being able to schedule that with members of the board also
Based on your availability.
So as Dr. Coleman said, we try to work backwards and get those dates scheduled ahead of time so that we can work around your individual board schedule.
Okay, so again, the second bullet under number 8, determine the process and schedule, which we've alluded to, and then provide strategies for building consensus around what would be your ultimate selection as the person for your next superintendent. Employing a new superintendent, board support, certainly something like that. You want to have total consensus. That's something we'll talk about if we're selected and we get to that phase of the process. It just politically, it's just it's to your advantage to reach a consensus as opposed to having a split vote, a 5-2, a 4-3, or in some cases even a 6-1. Because once you get to that phase of the process, hopefully things begin to fall in place. Then lastly, presentation to staff, students, and stakeholders. The person that you've selected with a reiteration of the brochure that you've mass disseminated, stating the qualifications and pointing out how the qualifications that you've posted totally match up with the person that's been selected, which is reflective of the input that your stakeholders have provided. BWP.
One other piece, Dr. Coleman, let me add, is that one of the critical masses with any searches, regardless of what search firm you select, is the confidentiality nature of your candidate. And so consequently, DWP takes on the application review and ultimately the applications that you see will be those that we recommend, that they become your property. But what you find is that candidates are reticent to apply to something if they're not going to be, if they don't make the finals. They may not have thought about being there and told their current employers. And so we really do stress the importance of confidentiality until you get down to those last 2 or 3 final candidates. And then it becomes okay, because by then you'll have people who will find out who they are, and they'll want to Google them, and all kinds of other stuff, and check up on them on their own. But we really do protect the nature of confidentiality with our applicants and with the candidates until they get to be one of those finalists.
And we can't underscore that enough, because if not, oftentimes some of those superstars will not apply. And you want them to be a part of the process. BWP's track record. 90% of candidates placed since 2006 completed a minimum of 3 successful years, and I'm a testament to that. I was first awarded a 3-year contract through the search process conducted by BWP. Midway into my 2nd year of my contract with Joliet Public Schools District 86, the board reopened the contract and stated that at the conclusion of the 2nd year, they were making that a 5-year contract. So I'm starting my 5th year of this actual 7-year contract. 95% of candidates placed since 2006 were offered successive contracts. Case in point would be myself. Not a single candidate placed since the founding of the company was found to be negligent, criminal in the performance of his or her duties. Unfortunately, there have been in the state of Michigan, the state of Illinois, across the country, superintendents that have not used good discretion relative to being a good steward of taxpayer dollars, of just operating with a high sense of morality as they carry out their business and being a public figure, not just for the district, but throughout the community. Dr. Hill?
The final piece that I want to say about why BWP is we're a little boutique firm. And so consequently...
Boutique?
Again,
Did you say boutique?
Boutique. We're not one of the big boys. And so what you get is really an intimate interaction with our associates, with the consultants, because, again, we do customize this for the individual district. So there may be some similar things. But to give you a concrete example, the search that I'm doing in Connecticut, they needed to have multiple interviews. So not only did we interview the board, but they gave us a whole list. So I think we conducted something like, I want to say something like 32 different one-on-one interviews, either by phone or face-to-face. And so that customization is kind of what makes us special, I think, compared to some of the other search firms.
The BWP guarantee. BWP will be on call for you throughout the search process and the following year.
Even when their plane is diverted through the weather or canceled through the weather, we try to make it happen.
You know, you've got to meet Dr. Hill. You know, she certainly is an example of leadership being situational. When she found out that she could not make it here, she says, well, there's a plan B. You've got copies of the document just like I do. I can talk via conference call if the board would be willing to agree to such an arrangement. Secondly, mentoring for the superintendent and the Board of Education at no cost for at least 1 year. That's unique to our district, to our company, and actually, for me, it's extended beyond 1 year. In fact, I was in dialogue with one of the other board members of BWP just today. You know, she just touches base periodically. She says I'm one of their models, and I end up sharing information periodically with other superintendents, particularly the neophytes. The next bullet, if the selected candidate does not complete 1 year in the position, BWP will repeat the search for expenses only. Also, BWP will not slate a previously placed candidate in another search for the term of the initial contract. Our fees, I believe this is a review for you. They're so noted. The expenses, as well as other potential costs.
And we're very cognizant of the cost in the school board, so, you know, we don't do exorbitant, extravagant kinds of things at your expense. We try to find as much free as we can. For example, in terms of your advertisement, we take a look at the associations in the state where you can advertise on their website for free. While we do, again, get you information about other places, we try to put together a recommendation for advertisement based on what you said you wanted with regards to the search. So we're very, very frugal. Sometimes my partner sees me because I get very frugal. I've had occasion to do work with someone in the St. Louis area and decided rather than drive, I would take the next bus, which they thought was really funny. But it was less expensive and it was going to get me where I needed to be.
That's right.
And it probably wouldn't have been canceled through the rain either. But we are very, very conscious of making sure that all the services are possible at least with the least amount of expense.
And then, as is indicated here, the other potential costs, she's indicated advertisement and as well as the candidate travel that finalists is outside the area. Why BWP? Outstanding record of success, as the one slide indicated, 98% of candidates placed since 2006 completed a minimum of 3 successful years. To that point, you want really longevity in your superintendent. In order to have success as it relates to improving teaching and learning, you don't want a person that's going to be here with you for 1 or 2 years. In order to impact change in a positive way and make that positive difference in the lives of your youth, you really need that kind of longevity. And we've got that track record as it relates to the persons that have ultimately been selected through the process coordinated by BWP. Strong reputation among clients and candidates, extensive recruiting resources to provide you the best candidates, comprehensive professional network, local, regional, and national. customized search process, as we've talked about, talented, committed consultants with experience in large unit districts. Certainly your pre-K through 12 district, and you want individuals with experiences crossing all those particular levels, and you're unique in that you have to have 4 levels. Not only do you have the elementary component, but you have what grades, pre-K through 4, and you have the 5th, 6th grade level, the 7th, 8th grade level, and then you get the 9 through 12 level. So the ideal candidates would have those kinds of experiences as well. Dr. Hill, any additional comments?
Just one final comment. As I said, you're going to be a district that people are going to be salivating to come to work for. I think some of your advanced programs, your Japanese schools, the fact that you're doing preschool programs, the depth and breadth of what I was able to read from your curriculum, updated overview, looking at your test data, you will not be a hard place to find a good person to come and work. It's just going to be a matter of your determining what the needs of the district are right now, and us helping you find a person that can meet those needs. So again, we're available, willing, if you would consider us.
Other questions or comments?
Yes. Mrs. McDonald.
Thank you. Just a question on helping us set parameters for the search, as far as salary and contract. Is that something that your firm would offer
Absolutely.
us as a board?
Absolutely. We would take a look at what the market bears for this immediate area, as well as the entire county, and then we look at districts in the state of Michigan of comparable size, comparable demographics, relative to what those superintendents are being compensated. And the bottom line is you want to be competitive, which allows you to again recruit the best candidates as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
In addition to that, when we are doing our initial screening of candidates, when we get down to the candidates that we would like to present to you, we also kind of get a feel for what they're looking for, because it doesn't make sense to have you excited about a candidate and not know that candidate is making money that is way beyond where you would be willing to pay a salary. So we ask the candidates about a range. We ask the board about a range, and then we try to make sure that both of those ranges are well within reach prior to even presenting you with a slate.
Right. And then keep in mind, as a part of that range that would be provided, we would also do a little review to make sure that your range is relative to what the market bears, so that you're not lowballing, and at the same time, you're not coming up with a number that does not reflect what people are compensated in this respective area. Because you don't want a person to come on board and feel like they've been undervalued. Then they won't be happy. What you want to do is provide them a competitive salary and fringe benefit package so that they can move that contract aside and just focus on being an outstanding superintendent for Livonia Public Schools.
Are there other questions from board members?
Oh,
Go ahead.
thank you.
Sure.
Dr. Coleman, does BWP have a policy about recruiting superintendents that you've placed previously, in terms of how long you have like a hands-off policy?
Yeah, for example, back here, where was that at?
Page 8.
You would talk about a slate.
BWP will not slate a previously placed candidate in another search for the term of the initial contract. In other words, initial contracts are normally 3 years. There are occasions where you might secure the services of a veteran superintendent, and he or she may request, or you may suggest more than a 3-year contract. So if someone is in that 3-year contract, we're not going to recruit that person. So that generally is the parameter. If they've completed that third year, just is not morally sound and rightful to do to that other school district. But beyond that, we don't have a set amount of time. Deborah, comments?
The only other thing is, unlike some of the other search firms, we don't have a cadre of folks out there that we're just trying to find jobs for. We really do, again, try to speak and to screen applicants as well as to do the headhunting part to actually get a good match for you. And so we also don't double search. We don't try to have, one candidate going to 5 different searches at a time.
Some of the big
So
firms
we're
will do
very
that.
cognizant. Yeah, we're very cognizant, and that's why I said that's one of the things that sets us apart, is that we really do focus on that individual district and not just have a team of superintendents out there that we're trying to place.
Otherwise, you'll get in a situation where your finalist is also a finalist somewhere else, and they're vetting you
Right.
against the other school district, and we
Right.
won't participate in that. We make sure we stay in close contact with all the candidates to
However,
avert that from occurring. Yes, Dr. Hill.
that does not necessarily mean that that person may not be with another firm where they may be interviewing for a position
That's right.
under another firm. But we also try to ascertain that information when we interview them. Are you with someone else? Are you looking at someone else? Are we in competition with someone else? So we try to dig out that information up front as well.
Yes.
Dr. Coleman, how many candidates have you successfully placed in Michigan?
Oh, wow. I have to defer to Dr. Hill. She's our historian.
I didn't hear the question.
Do you know how many individuals have been placed in the state of Michigan through the work of BWP from a historical standpoint?
I know that Dr. Barnes has done at least 2 searches that is in Michigan, which is one of the reasons he was also selected to be on this team.
Okay. But we could that's a good research question, going back, asking some of our founders from a historical standpoint. We don't usually list it that way. Well, how many over the last 20, 30 years have come from this state or that state? But recent ones, Dr. Barnes, one of our founding members, coordinated those 2 searches.
Right.
Are there questions from other board members? Mrs. Laura?
Does your firm currently have any similar searches that you're working on?
Dr. Hill, did you hear that question?
Okay.
Any similar
didn't.
searches of similar similar backgrounds in terms of school district?
Well, each school district is we have ongoing searches, but I think each school district has some uniqueness. We have some big city school districts. We're doing one in Berkeley. We have small districts, so we're conducting searches all across the country at this particular point.
And
But none of them.
there have been a couple in Indiana. As I think about your community makeup and your student body, there have been several around the Indianapolis area. Around Indianapolis, they have what's called township school districts. They call them MSD, Metropolitan School Districts, and they're all suburban. And there have been several that BWP has coordinated that would be very, very similar to you, as it relates to the overall dynamics of your district in terms of level of student achievement, demographics, and things of that nature. Match up very well.
Are there other questions from board members? I do have a couple of questions. You're out of state,
Yes.
so how often would we be physically seeing you on site versus how much would we be communicating electronically or so forth?
Okay.
You-
Typically what happens is there's a planning meeting with the board. This was our first contact. And as a part of that planning meeting, we will do the board interview. So, for example, the search that I'm doing in Connecticut, I've been to Connecticut 4 times. I will be going back to them 1 additional time unless they want me to come back. So it's the meeting with the board, and that's all a part of the planning session and the interviews. Then we come back for the focus group, and that's going to depend on the number of constituent groups that you have. Most of the time, we try to do focus groups in 1 day or 2, and then 2 or 3 of the consultants will come in to conduct those focus groups. So typically, it's about 4 or 5 days of travel back to your district. We do a lot vis-a-vis telecommunications, email, send you information, the postings for the ads, for example. We'll send that to the liaison that you select from the board to work with us will be the person our contact person that will be getting that information and then sharing it with you. So generally it's about 4 to 6 visits, again, at your determination. Most of the time, the consultants are not there for the interviews that you have with the candidates. We will have presented the slate, and then we'll be on call if you have questions, but we leave both of the first and second interviews up to you, and then we may come back at your request if you want us to help organize presenting the candidates to the community. So beyond those first 4 or 5 visits, the rest of that is determined about what the individual board needs.
As well as work with you, if you so desire, in developing a contract
Okay.
with that respective candidate.
Now, my other question is, you mentioned 22 weeks is your average time period. How realistic is it if this board desired to shorten that time period?
It's doable, but based on once you map out the process, once you determine when you would like to, you could expedite it, but you don't want to skip steps
Right.
in the process relative to the transparency that you want to convey to your stakeholders. But it could be expedited.
Okay.
Yes, occasionally we'll have a school district that superintendent retires suddenly or takes another position suddenly, and that 22 weeks gets cut down to like 12. And so again, it causes us to look at the dynamics and the parameters for how long you're going to be able to post the position, how fast can you get information out to gather feedback from your stakeholders. So those are kind of the time components that create that 22 weeks. But on more than one occasion, we've had to expedite that and reduce those times. And that's one of the reasons why Dr. Coleman started off saying, we work backwards. Tell us when you want to have, a superintendent in place, and we try to then build that in, working backwards in terms of then what do all of these other pieces look like time-wise.
And then 2 other things to keep in mind. One, as this was mentioned earlier, you really shouldn't conduct any of the interviews without all 7 members present.
Absolutely.
From a consistency standpoint. And then secondly, as you work with us to develop that calendar, you need to be mindful of the seasons. You don't want to let that schedule be heavily concentrated in the months of December, January, February, because that could result in meetings being postponed due to inclement weather and whatnot.
Alrighty.
Just small things that one often doesn't give a lot of thought to, but could happen.
Okay. Are there other questions from other board members? No. Alrighty, thank you so very much for being with us this evening, and thank you also to Dr. Hill for being willing to accommodate yourself electronically. It's appreciated. We do have 6 firms that we're interviewing, and we will get back with you. We're
Okay.
interviewing Monday and Wednesday, and we're deliberating Thursday on this issue.
Well, thank you for inviting us to present.
Thank you very much.
And again, I apologize for the weather, but it was out of my control.
Yeah, can't control the rain, can we? None of us can. And for the benefit of the public who
Okay,
are,
thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
thank
Hill.
you. For the benefit of the public who may be watching from home, we are going to do as we did after our first interview. We're going to take a brief recess to allow Dr. Coleman to gather his things and so forth, to allow board members to gather the appropriate notes for the next interview and get set up for the next one. We'll be back within a few moments.
Thank you, and much success to you during this process.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good evening. We are back from our brief recess and continuing with our interviews of the superintendent search firms. We have with us Dr. Carol Kleinow. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Kleinow, okay, from School Exec Connect. And Mr. Winry, would you like to do any introduction?
I'll just mention that Dr. Clino works for School Exec Connect, which is out of Minnesota, I believe.
Illinois.
Illinois.
Well, now, yes, you're right, now Minnesota as of July 1.
Okay. And
used to.
it's hard to get used to, isn't it? And, but she came to us tonight from Shelby Township, so her origins are more local.
Yeah.
And we welcome Dr. Clino tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. All right, well, let me start by saying we appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you this evening. We are very familiar, I am very familiar with the district, your reputation. It is one of the bigger districts in the state, and I know that through this process of searching for a superintendent, you are likely to draw some very capable, competent people to the district because of all the things you have going and the successes that you've enjoyed. So with that, I'd like to just talk tonight about some highlights of our firm, why we think we would be a good fit for you, a good partner for you in your search process. And I'll start by saying that if selected, I would be one of the search consultants. I'm one of the senior associates of School Exec Connect, and joining me would be Mr. David Peterson. By way of background, as Dana mentioned, I've worked at Oakland Schools, the intermediate school district in Oakland County, for the majority of my career, but I've also got experience as a school board member in Michigan, and I've been a superintendent, and I currently do a lot of other interesting things in my post-Oakland Schools life. Mr. Peterson has been a superintendent in Illinois. He's very involved at the federal level in policy development, and he and I have actually worked together on several searches in Michigan. We are part of what I would describe as the on-ground team in Michigan, along with a few other people that are pretty much located in southeastern Michigan. So we have a pretty good presence here. Dave, after working in Illinois all those years, has moved to Pentwater, Michigan on the west side of the state. So he's actually been in Michigan for a number of years and very familiar now with the lay of the land. Okay? So you've had a chance, I think, to look at our proposal and look at our responses to your RFP. And so what I thought I'd do tonight is just go through and highlight some things that I want to share with you and point out to you, and then I'm sure you're going to have some questions. So let me just start by saying that School Exec we're in our 11th year, but I would just say that from the point of view of search firms, that's pretty well established, and we have a great reputation. We carry 60 consultants in the firm, and anybody who's on our roster as a consultant is actively engaged in searches. So there's nobody on that roster that isn't involved in the firm. Over the course of the firm, we've done over 260 searches. We've got a 96% positive success rate with placement. We have a mid-America focus, which means we have a presence in Michigan and a good network in Michigan, but we also have a network that includes Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, and we've recently done some searches and we're kind of moving into Missouri. So I think that would be a strong network for you because of the location of the district here in Michigan. Even though we focus on Mid-America, we do have a strong network of national contacts, and you can see in our proposal that many of our consultants are involved in organizations across the country. So we can always use that network to reach out and try and recruit the right people for your district. Something that I have found exceptional about our firm and the way we do things is the engagement process that we have with your community and with the board. We do extensive focus group work, and typically over several days, but the focus group is targeted to do two things for you. First of all, it's really the ear to the ground, listen well to everybody's perspective, your stakeholders, and come up with a superintendent profile that kind of reflects the reality of what is needed today. When you have a superintendent who's leaving, we're always sad when they leave. However, it's time to take stock and say, okay, do we want to kind of replace the skills we have today, or do we want to look at what kind of leadership we need to put in place to take us over the foreseeable future? And so that focus group process really helps with that. So we help you with the profile, but then we take all of that data from our focus groups and from our online survey, and we put together a report that the board can choose to keep, or you can choose to actually post it and make it available. But that report kind of wraps together the current day issues, kind of blends people's visions, wants, needs, and desires for the future. It just a lot of good data comes out of that, a lot of good perception data specifically. And that we have found when our candidates actually take the position, it helps them get some insight and they understand the lay of the land, and it helps them actually be very successful in that first 100 days. So we really think that's important. The other thing that we do is we try to involve with the board's agreement people in the interview process in addition to the board. And so that is another part of engagement between the first interview where we actually screen the first round of applicants and those finalists that you would bring back, actually semifinalists. We would help you structure a way for people in the district, people in the community, to actually meet those candidates and talk with them and take some notes and give you some feedback. So you'll get a little better perspective on how people other than the board might view these candidates and perceive them. And again, we find that that's a really helpful perspective to have in the board's decision-making process. Our selection process has been tweaked and honed and refined over 11 years, and we are very proud of how we do the search process. There are things that we do on our own. There are things that you would do in terms of liaison work and so on. But I think we clearly map out in our proposal where we share and work together, like the planning meeting that we would have as we launch the search and some of the other steps. But we think that the process works very well. We are particularly pleased how we have included candidate presentations as part of the interview process. We think that that really makes a difference for the board. And once you get to your finalist, we gather references from those finalists, and we actually recommend that the board make reference calls in that final phase of the search so that you as board members get some on-the-ground perspective from that candidate's current district, whether they be a sitting superintendent or perhaps at a different executive level. But we think all those little details really help to get the relationship between the board and that new superintendent off to a good start. From the perspective of candidates, I think candidates would tell you that we are very respectful of our candidates, and they really have a lot of trust and faith in us. We respect their confidentiality. We are straightforward with them. We are open and honest with them. We give them feedback if they want to know how did it go, how could I have done better. We don't withhold information from them, and we, of course, conduct business legally and ethically at all times. But we have a very good relationship with candidates, and as we know, you get an applicant pool, you get it down to the person who's the successful candidate, but those who did not make it through and end up being the successful candidate, we maintain relationships with them, because what we know is there's a lot of people that can do the work to be a superintendent, but it's really all about the right fit for the district. So we find that those relationships have carried us through many searches, and people will come back and work through us again and have the confidence that we'll serve them well while putting the district first, of course. The thing that we think our search process does do for the board, and I've alluded to this earlier, is really give you like a 360 view of the candidates. We screen candidates as a firm. We will bring them in and interview them. The superintendent profile that we develop based on all the input from you and for your community, that is our roadmap for the interviewing process. We interview to that profile so that when we bring you candidates, we know that they have strengths in the areas that you deem extremely important for your district now and into the foreseeable future. The other thing that we think is very important is to get the perspective of people in the community and the staff, and we would work that into that final phase of the interview. How the board sees people in that formal interview process may be a little different, or maybe it might be a narrow slice of how the person might be perceived by the community, and that may help you in making a final decision. And then again, finally, the board getting involved in reference calls at the very, very end, of course. But I think that has helped board members have confidence in their decision and helps them further understand the candidates from people who know them and have worked with them day to day over the years. As a firm, I think we pride ourselves on being really flexible and responsive and accessible. And while we have a roadmap for the search process, I think we all know that every district's unique, and there's going to be some things that you want to talk over and customize. We're very open to that. We give you the template of our process, but we do understand that some things may need to be changed and adjusted based on how you view it, what the time is, and all those kinds of things. I think that, as I said, the focus group report and the superintendent profile is a really good support to the board. I think we also do a really good job on helping the board prepare for the interview process. We give you questions that you might want to use. We also set up the guidelines for your committees and help you plan and put together some informal opportunities for the board to meet those finalists or the semifinalists, perhaps dinner with the board or something like that. But we kind of walk through all of those things and help you with those steps. We can also, while we aren't attorneys, we can provide you with advice on contract and salary, how you communicate with the community. We can provide you with a media release when you get ready to announce your superintendent and those kinds of things. So whatever it is you need, we can pull upon our network and our resources to help you with that. But as I said, we understand we have to be flexible and responsive. If the board liaison to the firm during the search can only talk to us at 11 o'clock on Tuesday in the evening, that's when we'll talk. So we just understand it becomes part of a very busy person's schedule. You're taking on another layer of activity, and so we will accommodate as we need to so that you get your timelines met and that you get the superintendent that you need. Something else that I like about our firm is our credo. And what it says is that we're a group of people that are held together by a set of principles and beliefs. All of us are people who have worked in education throughout our career, and we really believe that at the center of all this search work, we have a responsibility, and I think you share that responsibility to students. I think we'd all agree. This is about students having they deserve a quality education, and what we know is by working in this field of superintendent searches, we are part of helping students for their future. So we never lose sight of the fact that we do this because we care that kids have a great education, and that means you have to have a great leader in your school district. So our second responsibility is to you, the board. We want to do everything we can to make you successful in your search, and we understand the very important decision you have to make. Education leadership matters. We know that a superintendent makes a huge difference in a school district, in a community, for the staff. I mean, it's just a very, very important decision, and it's a very important leadership decision. So we don't lose sight of that. Certainly we have a responsibility in our credo. We talk about our responsibility to our candidates. We treat them well, we treat them respectfully, and we maintain relationships with those that aren't successful in a search so that we can continue to work and help them develop and aspire to a leadership role. And then finally, we have a really great culture within the firm because we all support each other. We work collaboratively, and we find that by leveraging all the resources of the team that we can really bring the best candidates forward to districts. The qualities I think that are good qualities, unique qualities for the firm is that we have done every search that we've done, spent on time and on budget. So I think you would probably like that. We do have, we kind of can get aggressive with our recruiting through our network. We really want to find good people that fit your profile. We have credibility with candidates, which means when we call them, they will listen and actually consider when we say, hey, here we have this position, this is a great district, here are some things that they're looking for. We know you have these traits, would you consider throwing your hat in the ring? And obviously, there's a level of confidentiality that can be maintained until the board decides who they want to interview. Obviously, then you have to go public. But I think having those relationships helps us get people interested in positions. And then finally, as a firm, we're dedicated to the notion of continuous improvement within the firm. We have an annual conference where all of our consultants get together. We look at trends and things we need to do to get better as a firm, but also things we need to adjust to improve based on feedback from districts that we've served. And I think that's a really unique feature of our firm. From the point of view of guarantees, we will work with you and present candidates until you find the right person on your terms, and you decide. So if it takes the initial timeline, it takes initial timeline. If that doesn't work and you need more candidates, we will just keep going until you find a certain. Now, I believe you'll be able to accomplish it in your timeline, but I want to assure you, we are that serious about getting you the right person. Finally, we will not recruit your superintendent for another position for his or her first 2 contracts. And then finally, if for some reason, and it doesn't happen, but it can happen. I mean, it's very rare that this would happen, so I don't want everybody to be worried about it. But if for some reason your new superintendent leaves within the first year, for whatever reason, we will redo the search. We'll charge only to the expenses. There will be no consulting fees because, again, we want this to work. We want you to be happy, and we want your district to have a great leader. So with that, I would just close by saying that you have a big task ahead of you. I have in my life experience, I've been in your chair or chairs, and it is daunting, but it is doable. And I think the key is to find that right partner. And we would be extremely honored if we could be that partner. We think that working closely with you as the board, your staff liaison, using our process, that we can come together and in a reasonable timeline that we work out, I think we can find the right person for this district. I know from my experience in the area that your students have a long track record of being successful academically, athletically, all those things. I mean, this is a great place for kids. Your parents have high expectations. I'm sure you have high expectations. Your staff won't settle for anything less than excellent, and certainly your community won't. So we understand that, and we want to help you get that person to keep the excellence in Livonia. So that would be my set of comments tonight. So if you have specific questions about the proposal or anything I can embellish, I tend to be a person of few words. Rather have you ask the questions.
All righty. Mrs. Bonfield, and then we'll go to Mrs. Jarvis.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for
Hi.
your presentation.
Thank you.
Do you have any post-hiring support that you provide to the board or to the superintendent?
The proposal is the proposal, but yes, we could talk about a post-hiring. I have a lot of experience in board, superintendent, team building, governing body work, so we could help with that onboarding process. We can help with a kind of what are the rules of the road for the board. Let me ask you, how many of you have been on the board, say, for less than one term, one full term? So we have
Less than one term.
less than one full term. So we have kind of a mix of experience, or
Well, I'm in my first term.
you're in your first term?
Yeah, I'm
Okay, so
Yeah, we're relatively young.
Young, okay,
Mr.
so
Johnson
you-
and I
so-
are 5 and 6 years, and we're the most senior members of the
Okay,
board. So it's
so
fairly young.
knowing that your
you're right, I'm sorry.
superintendent.
I take that
I
back.
mean,
I have about 10 years.
I apologize.
Okay, so
never
thinking
mind.
about
And
this.
Mrs. Laura has
Okay.
many years.
But not consistent.
And then a gap.
Okay,
Stopped
okay.
and then came
So,
back.
so thinking about, you've enjoyed 13 years of stability, predictability, and, I mean, which is wonderful for the district, which is wonderful for the board. So none of you have been through the experience of bringing a new CEO into the organization. So yes, we can help you with that. I would be happy to help you with that. And again, we could customize that to what you think you need. We could look at setting joint goals for the year. We could look at roles, responsibilities, how are we going to communicate. There's a lot that happens in that initial phase of getting to know each other. And so working and setting joint operating rules and joint understandings is very important to getting that off to a good start. So the answer would be yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. Again, thank you for coming today. I have 2 questions.
Mhm.
Firstly, I saw in the proposal that you have the capacity to help us select an interim superintendent if that's needed.
Yes, we could do that, and that would be just, you'd have to let us know. So what are your plans right now when your current superintendent leaves?
We haven't really discussed it yet.
You haven't discussed it
But
yet.
it seems like,
Okay, so that would be kind of what I would say a modified mini-search. I mean, we would go out and try to find somebody who could fill that role. And again, we have some contacts and a network in Michigan, because most likely an interim will come from a local area. But we'd be happy to assist in that.
and my second question is looking at your proposal under Section 3, the work plan, in Phase D,
Why don't
selecting, I hope you have it in front of you.
I do, so let me just go right there.
Sure.
Phase D.
Okay,
Got it.
selecting the candidates. It says November through December. But then at the end, it has the new superintendent assumes duties on July 1st, 2016. Does that typically take 6 months?
I think that was simply here's a work plan, and to be determined once we sit and do that planning session. Does it have to be July 1st? Certainly doesn't. But as you know, the school year and the cycle of things, it depends on when you want the start date for the new superintendent may have some bearing on your applicant pool. So the discussion would be, can you have us interim and start your new leader on July 1st, or is it a desire of the board to start that person sooner? So I think we'd have to make that decision together, but it wouldn't have to be July 1st.
Thank you.
I think that when the proposal was put together, there's probably an assumption of looking at it that way.
Sure.
Okay, so to be determined, and certainly you would be the board that would want to decide that.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bird.
Mrs. McDowell?
Thank you. To that thought process, Mrs. Jarvis, if we had assistance with finding a good, solid interim, I think that would make the transition easier all around for the incoming superintendent to bring them in, that they would know they would have a solid year to transition wherever they were coming from, if they were in fact coming from another district.
Absolutely.
So, and it would give us time to kind of prep and get ourselves, in gear and find us comfortable with the process too. But just something to think about.
Any other questions for board members? Mr. Centers?
Just in regards to an interim superintendent, sorry, I know this is a little off topic, but is it typical for someone to be an interim superintendent for a full year? To me, that seems maybe a little longer than what is typically done.
Based on my experience, it is not typical. Interim usually does mean literally interim. Something
Yeah.
happens where you just need that short-term
Right.
coverage. And I think in the end, you would want to move to your permanent leader as expeditiously as possible.
Sure.
Because these transitions are difficult in an organization. So I would think you would want to get to the permanent superintendent as quickly as possible. So typically, yes, this interim is not usually a year.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Other questions from board members? All right. I've got a couple, and it may spur others to jump in. If so, please do so. How many other similar searches is your firm currently working on?
To be honest, Ms. Burton, I could not tell you all the searches we're working on in the other states. In Michigan right now, I don't think we have an active search that's similar. We just recently finished the Grosse Pointe search.
Yes.
We've done, I think, Novi, Bloomfield Hills, Birmingham, Rochester. That was Rochester about a year ago.
Okay.
Okay?
And was Farmington one of yours also?
Yes.
Okay. Just
I'm
wanna make sure.
remembering some of the ones that I worked on.
That's okay. Just want to make sure we're trying to keep all of our information
Yes.
straight on the different firms also.
But I would say, in terms of like districts in the
Yes.
metro area, I would say we've done some that are very similar.
Okay.
Expectations, demographics, a lot of achievement. Yes.
And to my knowledge, those that you just mentioned were all within the last 5 years or so?
Mhm.
Okay, it's fairly recent. All right. Can you speak to recruiting? You touched on it earlier, but we're aware that, at least speaking for myself, I'm certain when we post a job like this, we'll have applicants. But that may or may not mean we have the applicant that we really want and need. That individual may need to be actively recruited. And can you speak to your experience with
Sure.
actively recruiting and what that process would look like from your perspective?
So the goal is to cast a wide net, obviously. Casting a wide net doesn't mean you're looking for anybody who is out there, but what it means is communicating the opportunity. Because there are people who are talented and probably would look at this as a destination district because of its reputation. In Michigan, it's one of the larger districts. So So somebody who's working in a district that may want a different challenge, bigger district, may be very attracted to the opportunity. So communicating, and that's some of the time that is necessary for the search is just to allow the communication to get out there, because you want to cast a very wide net. So you would use, you would have to make a decision. Do you want to pay for advertising in Education Week, which is a national publication, or do their online? But certainly you'd go to the common channels in Michigan, which would be the MASA website, the MASB, et cetera. So you do those kinds of things. So what we would do is we monitor the applicant pool for a while, and we look at the activity, and then we will make a decision. Are we getting candidates that we think will be a good fit? Because often people that apply, we know them because we've been around the metropolitan area for a number of years collectively, more years than I want to think about. But anyway, we know a lot of people, we have a lot of connections, so we can kind of watch and see where it's going. And then we will actually start calling people and saying, we are doing the search in Livonia Public Schools. Here's what they're looking for. We know you. We know your track record. We get to know people who are interested in taking on a new challenge, but maybe just need that little nudge to put their hat in the ring. So we monitor, and then we get on the phones and we start recruiting people who might want an invitation and some sense of confidence that they are a good fit for the district. And then we will also take it to neighboring states. Okay.
You mentioned a handful of districts that are similar to Livonia Public Schools. Within the last 5 years or so, when you've placed those folks, have you found, to your recollection, have you found that those new superintendents have mainly come from within the state of Michigan or from outside?
Well, I'd have to stop and think for a second. My initial reaction would be, I think it's half and half. I think, let's see, Bloomfield, Farmington, Rochester, Novi came from in Michigan. I think Birmingham and Grosse Pointe came from another state.
Okay.
So it's kind of a mix.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a mix.
Alrighty. Okay.
And I would expect the applicant pool for a district such as with the reputation that you have, you will probably get a mix in your applicant pool. And then again, it comes down to the fit, and you actually have the final say on whether they're from Michigan or not, because you're
Right.
going to pick who fits you best.
Right. And of course, from our perspective, we see the some of the factors that make education in Michigan unique, and yet that same statement is probably true for any state that we look at. They probably each have their own rules, regulations, laws,
Yes,
cultures that
they
make their
do.
education unique.
Yep, that's one thing we've learned in talking with candidates from other states. While people describe what's happening in Michigan, there is a corollary in other places. So everybody just has their challenges.
Alrighty. Anybody else have other questions? What, again, you talked about timeline, and we talked about that, the July 1st is may have been more of a boilerplate template kind of a time. What would you say is your average timeline if we're looking at this? And we recognize, too, that this may not be the typical time of year that boards are looking for a superintendent. So what should we realistically be looking at if we're trying to get someone in as quickly as is reasonable and is responsible?
Okay. I think that the work plan without the July 1st deadline actually lays out a pretty reasonable pace for a search. The challenge that the work plan presents is when you hit that December timeline, the whole world shuts down for a week or two. I believe when we did Midland, we ran into this issue, and you just have to kind of plan around it. But if it is your desire to have somebody here in mid-year, then that's how we will aim the search, and that's how we will proceed. And I think what you need to remember is it is not a district that's undesirable. It is a very desirable position, and I think that if people are aspiring to a position such as this, think about it. It comes open every 13 years. If they're serious about it, they will apply for it. And people will just have to make that decision. So I think, again, you need to make the best decision for the board and for the district, and we will take it from there. Okay, that's the best answer I can give you. It just, you kind of have to go through it. And if you don't get an applicant pool that's to your satisfaction, I mean, I'll be honest with you, we can just say, look, we need to extend the search. But I don't anticipate that that would happen for a district like this.
Okay, all right.
Okay?
Are there other questions from board members? Mr. Sanders?
One more. If we didn't get the applicants that we were looking for, is it not only possible to extend the search, but to extend, or to change the start date?
Yeah.
And go through the process yet again?
Yeah, as I
Yeah.
said in our guarantees, I mean, if we get to the end of our plan, the plan that we put in place, and you don't have a candidate that you think is a good fit, we keep going, okay? We are not going to abandon you and leave you in a mess. I mean, we want you to be successful as a board. We want you to have a quality candidate. We believe that the district is such that you are going to get some really good applicants. My wish for you is that you'll have trouble deciding amongst many of them. And, you know, the thing is, I think sometimes people focus on how many applicants. It's not the number, it's the quality. I mean, if you ended up with, say, 12 to 15 outstanding people, and then you had to winnow it down to that first group you're going to interview, which is typically about 6 or, you know, you don't want to set a fixed number because you have to really see the pool. But you're not going to likely interview 12 or 15 people. So, you know, that would be a better problem than 60 people where you're going, well, this person doesn't even, you know, come close to what we're looking for. I mean, so it's not about quantity, it's really the right applicant pool, the right people in front of you with the right skills.
Other questions? I have one. In your proposal that you provided for all of us, at one point I noted that the comment was made that you're a virtual company.
Yes.
Can you tell us how often you will be physically present with us? And do I understand correctly that you are still from Shelby, Michigan area?
Yeah, let me
Okay.
address that. As a virtual company, it does not mean that there is a headquarters, was in Illinois, now in Minnesota, where 60 people come to work every day. Okay, we are scattered around the states that we live in, and I think that brings us strength because we really do have that on-ground experience. So yes, I am in Shelby Township. I am on ground, and I will be here as much as you need me. The boards, it's been my experience that the boards have different levels of need on this. For example, in one district, you know, I went up there, Dave and I actually went there, and we met with the board for a day, and then we spent 2 or 3 days with focus groups because it was a mid-sized community, and it was just really important that anybody touched the search process. So we spent a lot of time doing that, and then we actually went back and sat in on the interviews. I don't know that we really added anything but moral support because the board was a highly capable group, but they wanted somebody there just kind of as a reassurance, so we covered the interviews for them. We've had other districts that once we get to their prep for the interviews, they have their questions, we kind of walk through, here's your process. I mean, if the boards are, you know, work together well and they're high functioning, they don't really need somebody sitting there doing that. They can take it from there. So it just kind of depends on your level of need and what makes you feel comfortable.
Okay.
But yes, I'm here local.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and then that did answer my
Yeah.
confusion I had when I saw that phrasing on that
Yeah.
company. All right. Are there other questions we have? All righty.
Okay.
Mr. Winry, did you have anything else to add? All righty. Thank you so very much for coming in and spending time with us this evening. As you are probably aware, we're interviewing companies this evening and again on Wednesday evening, and then we will be deliberating and coming to a decision on Thursday. That is the plan anyway.
That sounds
So-
great. And again, we thank you for the opportunity, and we would truly look forward to working with you. And
Thank you.
regardless how it turns out, we wish you great success in your search. I know you're going to find a good person, so.
Terrific. Thank you so much. That is the last item on our agenda this evening, so at this point, we are adjourned. For those who are interested, you may tune back in Wednesday evening for the continuation of our process. Thank you. We're adjourned.